Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's Astadia and Alert Logic webinar featuring Hybrid Cloud Security. Are you at risk? During the presentation, if you have any questions, feel free to type it into your chat box on your control panel, and we'll save it for the end of the presentation. We have a great presentation in store for you today, so let's get started. Steve Lack, I'll hand it over to you.
Why, thank you, Desiree, and thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Your presenters for the meeting today are myself, Steve Lack. I am Vice President of Cloud Solutions with Astadia, and we are honored to have Stephen Coty, Chief Security Evangelist with Alert Logic. So it's the Steve and Steve show. So for ease of communication, we call him Coty. And that way you can tell the difference. So as far as the agenda goes today, we're going to give you a little introduction to Astadia. It's a mini sales pitch, but I'll try to keep that short and sweet, but I have to do it. It's my job. Then we'll talk about the security pyramid and how we view that. We'll talk about defense in-depth strategy, and then I'll turn it over to Coty to talk about the Alert Logic solutions in this space, just really tremendous, and I think you'll be very excited when you see them. We also have a special offer in store for those folks who are attending the webinar today, and then certainly we'll open it to Q&A. As Desiree mentioned, you can put your questions in the chat box, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. So for those that don't know us, Astadia is a full-service technology consulting firm helping our clients maximize the impact and minimize the risk in today's blended enterprise and cloud ecosystem. We call it that as we don't believe that every application and workload can and should be moved to the cloud, and there certainly will be some on-premise requirements, as we'll be discussing today. We offer a full suite of services from cloud assessments and migrations, even for legacy workloads on mainframes, for example, to DevOps, to a full suite of managed service from desktop to data center to cloud. Our clients choose us for our experience, our agility, and results. We've been performing platform change for over 25 years, and we really pride ourselves on being agile and flexible. Being able to work with you the way your organization likes to do things. And most importantly, we do deliver results. Our goal is for every one of our clients to be a reference for us. As you can see, we do offer a full suite of services to help you migrate, secure, manage and optimize your workloads that you're moving to the cloud, of course, as well as those that are going to stay in your data center. We even provide end-to-end support for your end users from our 24/7 US-based service desk to help them with their mobile devices, to their desktops, to their applications. But obviously today we're focused on security, and obviously that's why you joined. So before we get to the meat of the presentation, I wanted to take a minute to talk about what happened last week. As I'm sure all of you are aware, we saw the most massive ransomware attack in history with this WannaCry episode. The attack took advantage of the U.S. National Security Agency methods released by the Shadow Brokers hacker group last month. The attack takes advantage of a vulnerability in Microsoft's Server Message Block Protocol, or SMB1. And Microsoft actually knew about this issue and released patches to fix this back in March. But I think as we can see from what happened, many companies are behind on their patches and really fell victim to this. Microsoft, they even released patches to operating systems that haven't been used in years. I mean, from Vista even, they released a patch for, so kind of fascinating. So as a bit of an aside on this, though, while these people appeared to be pretty good malware creators, they were really not very good thieves. According to a lot of the accounts that I read, The way this the thing was written, they had no way to actually track who paid them and who didn't. And so by most estimates, have them collecting somewhere in the neighborhood of $55,000, which is really kind of a pittance considering the size and scope of this caper. But that's neither here nor there, but I found that kind of interesting. So before we start talking about specific products and services, any organization needs to address these 5 broad topics. First of all, you got to identify exactly what it is that needs to be secure. What are your family jewels, so to speak? You know, specific assets that need to be protected. You know, are there compliance issues that need to be identified and adhered to? Certainly, once these items are identified, you need to decide how you're going to protect them. What technologies and processes and methods are you going to put in place? What training needs to be done, both for your technical people as well as your full end user base, and we'll talk about that a little more. If there is some kind of event, how do you detect it? How do you make sure that a series of events are correlated and that they're even real and not some false alarm? Once it's determined that something, you know, bad has happened, you know, how do you respond to it? Are there specific plans in place to respond to an event or security breach? And, you know, certainly if the worst does happen, do you have right plans in place to recover from it? So Astadia believes in designing what we call a complete defense in-depth scenario. So at the top, we get back to protecting the family jewels, putting the appropriate policies and procedures in place, including such, you know, simple things as password strength and duration, to things a little bit more complicated, such as data classification. And there are certainly companies that push this, but I think if you could do this in a relatively simple way without putting a tremendous burden on your end user population, there are ways to do this. Certainly one of the most overlooked items is yearly training and awareness. The vast majority of corporate breaches occur due to phishing and unsuspected employee. More than you realize, that's even the way this thing works, I want to cry. So we are firm believers in training staff on how to recognize these types of things, even running exercises internally to see if we can get employees to bite. And if they do, at least they learn something from it, and it's nothing that's going to harm the company. You know, certainly physical security needs to be taken into account. Excuse me, door locks, security badges, you know, visitor controls, and the like are certainly mandatory for companies. From a network standpoint, firewalls, IPS, VPNs, et cetera, are still very much required. But as you move to a cloud environment, things change. You know, Coty is going to go into that in more detail ahead. Excuse me, your hosts and operating systems certainly need to be hardened. And as we discussed earlier, regular and frequent patching is more critical than ever. From an application perspective, as you'll hear more about in the next segment, defensive programming techniques need to be adopted, and web application firewalls are also mandatory. Certainly data files need to be encrypted, access control lists applied, and at least some level of data loss prevention, DLP, should be adopted to at least catch such things as social security numbers or PII information being emailed outside the company. There's a lot of solutions. Again, it gets back to some of the data classification things we talked about earlier, but there's some relatively simple things that could be put in place to at least catch things like PII, social security numbers, and the like from being emailed outside the company. Astadia and LearLogic, as you'll see, have really teamed up to bring a complete end-to-end security solution for your hybrid cloud environment. Astadia's expertise, along with LearLogic's world-class security operations center and global threat management capability, can bring a complete defense in-depth deployment to your organization. So I'm going to turn it over to Coty to go in depth about the current global threat landscape and what you can do to protect your hybrid cloud environment.
So we're going to talk about hybrid security monitoring here today. The biggest piece here being, what does the hybrid cloud look like? There's a couple of different variations. So there's a lot of hybrid cloud started around the managed hosted environment that now people want to take advantage of cloud services. So now they had a private backend where their database, intellectual property were held, but they might have had a front-end web server with a point-to-point connection between the two. But then as companies, data centers started, they had to be refreshed, right? Buy servers, update the HVAC systems, raise floor security systems. People thought, well, why don't I just move my data center into the cloud, and then I can access it directly from my brick and mortar environment via a secure tunnel or direct connect. So that has been really the trend on which most companies are moving to, where they're moving all of their sensitive assets into this private cloud with that point-to-point connection between their offices and this private cloud, meaning that there's no exposure through the public internet. Now, some of the things we look at are the different types of attacks. So this is based on our customer data, and being able to look at the different types of attack vectors across cloud and your brick and mortar environments, we see a couple of key points of difference. With your brick and mortar, you have a lot more brute force, as we've seen with the WannaCry, and a lot of people you probably heard about, where a phishing email comes in, usually into a non-technical department, finance, HR, something like that. They compromise a single workstation, and then they need to start finding out, what does this person have access to? And then that means they're brute forcing. And then they find out the data they're looking for is unable to be accessed by this person, so they need to escalate their privileges. So they need to find either like a SAM file on a server where they can go ahead and attempt to decrypt it, so they can again brute force usernames and passwords till they get access to what they're looking for, which is the application, which is your gateway to your data. Now in the cloud, it's a little different because the application is right there out front, right? So application attack was 48% of what we saw, with brute force and recon following thereafter. Now that application is very important because what we see when we look at global analysis of what's going on out there, the different types of attacks. So this is a portal we use called Recorded Future. And on the left, you can see it has all the attackers that are, in the news today. All the methods of attack. As you see, WannaCrypt is right up there, along with Black Moon and Dropper and all the other, great names that come along with cool malware. Then you see your targets. Then we start looking: are they associated with any type of operation? Are they organized? Are they working together? And then finally, what are those indicators of compromise that are linked across the board? So this allows us to really put together a really good security posture because we can understand what's happening. So for example, a lot of malware writers come out of Eastern Europe, and these guys are phenomenal writers, and they can write code like nobody else's business. But they need to test that code, right? And they can't rely on international latency of milliseconds, because sometimes when you're dealing with, like, for example, a botnet, if you don't get a response within a certain amount of time, it actually will move on to the next victim. So they do a lot of their testing in their own backyard. That's why we see Eastern Europe hitting a lot of Western Europe. The UK, Ireland, France, Spain. But as they hit those environments, it allows us to grab those pieces of malicious code and start deciphering them using, what people have traditionally used the kill chain for, right? Recon, weaponize, deliver, exploit. And find the indicators of compromise so that you can write the right security content that fits your adversary's attack vectors, and also focus your content on the technologies that you utilize, which we'll get into in a little bit. But let's first talk about brick and mortar. So we look at a typical network design. I pulled this off of an old hospital design that I used to work with, as far as network design, and as you can see, you have every department under the sun over here as far as all these different oncology and pediatrics, cardiology, and all these networks are autonomous to intelligent. And any one of these people could be infected any, right? So you have the local pediatrics, and they're able to the local database, but then connection to neurology. Now, hey, there's a whole nother data pool that they can go. So this is where they start mapping out your network and looking at targeted assets. So this is primarily around espionage, right? You send in that malware with a target to a certain individual, and we've done things like this actually here in-house as we're testing code, where you profile people within the company, and you send them a phishing email based on what they like. Say they recently bought a new car, a Maserati or something like that, and you play to that. You send them a email from the Maserati Club of Dallas, and come join the club. Come, we saw you bought a new car from your local dealership. We're a great club. We get together. We go on rides. And all of a sudden that person clicks on it, right? And then there's a secondary infection, right? Because once they compromise that one workstation, now they have to see what is around us. What type of information can I get access to? What other systems am I connected to? And so they start looking until they find the actual servers that they're looking for, which is the actual attack on for, and then boom, they start exfiltrating that data out. And that's usually when you detect them. On average, it's about 209 days. So we do the right thing. We do a security in-depth strategy, which is exactly what we should be doing. And like for the brick and mortar, we look at like firewalls and ACLs. You got to put that firewall and that AV to give you some room to build your internal security strategy. Deep packet forensic analyzers. I'm a big fan of deep packet forensic analyzers because it's like the TiVo for your network. It records everything going in and out of your environment. So when something does happen, you can actually replay the traffic, pull out the malicious code, analyze it. It's great for any type of incident response investigation. You have intrusion detection. Network access controls. Great fan of network access controls because it vets who's allowed on your network. So network access controls are usually deployed in 3 phases. One, does this person have a valid either Active Directory or LDAP user ID and password? 2, are they up to date with their current antivirus signatures? And then 3, are they up to a patching level that I've deemed secure? So have they downloaded all their patches? So like with WannaCry, you've had 2 months with these patches. These patches should have been installed. Looking at server apps, you got log management. Log management is more than just for operational now. It's always been a great operational tool to find out, when processors are being maxed out or memory is running out. But it's also a great security tool because you can find the failed logins. You can find people creating, secondary admin credentials they use so that they don't use the primary credentials. There's a lot of things in log management that you can find. Now, software development lifecycle is also very important because that deals with your application. And you really need to make sure that you have injected security into that software development lifecycle where security checks are checking code as they're being deployed. And as more organizations are moving to an agile type of development process where there's multiple rollouts, we just don't do one rollout a quarter, they might do multiple rollouts a day perhaps. It's even more important that we're scanning that code because again, that's where attackers are going after. They want to find vulnerabilities in that code so they can exploit IDs and usernames and passwords so that they can target and focus on trying to attack your environment efficiently and effectively. Mail and web filtration, big tool. Mail filtration, that's for phishing emails, right? As the emails are coming in, it scans URLs by default, but sometimes you need to put that extra check mark in to make sure that it actually scans the actual file. And there's some great mail filters out there that will not only scan the incoming file, whether it's PDF, a Word document, Excel, whatever, it will scan it across a couple of different antivirus vendors, but some of them will also launch them in a sandbox to make sure they're clean before they even send them on. Antivirus, still not dead in brick and mortar. Encryption, very key. PGP, we need to start really encrypting our emails. See, too many emails are going around with patient records and credit card numbers and social security numbers going out. I mean, we really need to start encrypting our emails. And file integrity management, FIM. This is a big one, especially if you're a medical center or a financial institution that just has clinical workstations, right? They're all the same. Same operating system, same services running, same registry. You know, use FIM, whitelist that golden image that you have, so then when a piece of malicious code get launched on there, well, guess what? It doesn't match my whitelist. Escalate that. I want to know about that. So FIM's also a fantastic tool in that environment. And also, finally, identity and access management. I mean, we really need to stay on top of you know, our user IDs, our passwords, how much access do people have? When they change departments, do they keep the access from the previous department? These are all things we need to be monitoring. Now, this is a good, solid security in-depth strategy for your brick and mortar. But when we go into cloud, it's a little different because the environment changes a little bit, right? The infrastructure layer, right? The facilities, the computing power, the storage, the hypervisor, the network. You don't need to worry about that anymore. That's your service provider's responsibility. When a hypervisor exploit comes out, it's their job to actually patch for that hypervisor. When a brand new networking vulnerability comes out, and say one of the many vendors out there, platforms that there are, you know, it's their responsibility to make sure those patches are deployed and put in place. Now, everything above that is your responsibility, like the platform layer, the software layer, which leads to service delivery. And it's really a constant circle because that service delivery also dictates your operational layer, your management layer, which then affects your platform layer, your software layer. So it's a very interesting, unique environment, but it really takes a little load off of you because now you don't have to worry about that infrastructure layer. You just need to have to worry about your applications, your code, what you're placing out there, and make sure that that's patched, it's monitored, it's managed. Because the shared security responsibility is very true in the cloud. So here's a great example right here of the cloud service provider responsibility. As I said, the compute, storage, DB, network, they give you logical network segmentation, right? They protect to a point of external DDoS, spoofing. They harden that hypervisor, you know, the image libraries that you're pulling from. They make sure that they update those. And they grant you root access. Now, once you have that root access, you know, the rest of it's your responsibility, right? Everything in black, you know, securing your code, you know, software and virtual patching, configuration management, access management to both your apps and your hosts, patching your hosts, configuration hardening, security monitoring is something they do not do for you. They do not do any of this for you. This is your responsibility on what they have. Now, they do offer lots of services. Like, for example, this is AWS. AWS offers all these different services, and they're probably one of the most innovative cloud companies out there today because they keep coming out with new and innovative ways to not only operationalize your data, but to secure your data as well. You just need to learn the lingo, is what it comes down to. Like, for example, in the AWS environment, they have what's called a Lambda function. And Lambda basically is just scripting. So if you've ever had to write a script to deploy software or deploy workstations, and you write a little Perl script or Python script or whatever you write, that's a Lambda function in the cloud. You know, security, operational monitoring, you know, is called CloudWatch. So there's everything you need to have a good operational strategy in the cloud. You just need to have to understand the terminology and the new terms. And the same thing applies to your security architecture. I mean, going across the board, everybody's there that plays within the security space is securing your environment, right? You know, some of these names you may recognize, some of them you may not. Now, the interesting thing about this slide is that the names you use at your regular brick and mortar may not always work the same. So, you know, I'll pick on like Checkpoint. So Checkpoint Firewall is probably one of the best firewalls I've seen out there. Really easy to use, easy to implement, brick and mortar, really efficient, right? But in the cloud, it's kind of a bastardized version of it, right? It doesn't have the full functionality that you would expect. And within AWS, I mean, there's some things you could do, like with security groups, for example. Security groups are a service that when you build an instance in AWS, you have to build a security group assigned to it. And that security group builds ACLs, which is access control list, right? You know, source IP, destination IP, and the port that you want to allow. But it also does stateful inspection, right? So, you know, the fact that you have security groups, would a firewall really be the first thing I would deploy? Probably not. But because I'm protecting my application, I probably would deploy a web application firewall first, right? It goes the same thing as like antivirus. You know, antivirus is a great brick and mortar tool because it catches quite a bit of just the noise of, you know, the configures and some of the versions of ransomware and things like that. It catches locally. But, you know, in the cloud, it's a different workload environment. So maybe FIM might be a better tool to implement before AV in that environment. So you got to think about how your strategy is going to change when you migrate from brick and mortar into the cloud, because that strategy does change, but the security strategy as a whole remains the same. You're just using different vendors, different names, different services than you're normally used to. Now, looking at some of the hybrid challenges, you know, we find that, you know, maintain security in both environments is sometimes too much for some companies, right? Because they know their environment, their brick and mortar. When I was a network administrator, man, you gave me an IP address, I can tell you what closet it was coming out of and what part of the building that that IP address was located in, even down to the switch level, right? You know, when it gets into the cloud, you don't have that much control of what's going on in the back end, which is not a bad thing, right? I mean, but to be able to understand what your security posture in the cloud and what's relevant, what you need to bring in-house, sometimes it's a different skill set than what you see in brick and mortar. Now, there are some blind spots, but there are ways to connect, you know, because you have brick and mortar attacks, you have cloud attacks. Now, when you're aggregating all that data, like, for example, if you are running into two different cloud environments from a brick and mortar, right, and you have a targeted attacker that's focused on your company and he's attacking you from these certain IP addresses, and you see that through logs or incidents across all three environments, now you're looking at a targeted attack versus some script kiddie that's just like, you know, scanning a whole subnet and happens to hit one of your AWS instances and, you know, moved on after he was done. You know, that's not a targeted attack. That's a guy looking for an attack of opportunity. Now, tuning tools is very relevant because tuning, you're only as good as your security content that you deploy to your technologies and the correlation logic that you run. That's what's most important. Now, on top of these security growths, you got, you know, increased complexity, different environments, the tools are different, costs are changed, the way you get billed, you don't pay a lot up front, you pay along the way. Training and technical skills, that's the one that you really need to put your people through the right process, the right training, so that they can be fluent in cloud, so that they can be that human translator for you, deciphering what a script versus a Lambda function is, right? You got to have your processes, visibility and reporting. You know, different tools provide different output. Integration points. It all requires resources and time from your staff, but it really comes down to, you know, legacy tools, human expertise, and threat and security content. So, you know, the legacy tools do not work as well in the cloud sometimes. So you got to look at cloud native tools that were built for the cloud in the cloud. And do a comparison. Look at them. You know, if you're used to using one tool because that's what you use at brick and mortar, and they offer that same tool in the cloud, you know, compare it versus a cloud-born tool, and you're going to see a difference in the way that it works and also the way that it reports out to you. Now, some of the hybrid cloud solutions, 10 best practices that I put out there, is securing your code. Like we said, the code is, your application is the gateway to the jewels of the kingdom, right? It's that database is what your attacker's after. But there are also other variations, right? Like, we'll use WannaCry as an example. It's It hits a lot of brick and mortar environments. It's coming in through phishing emails, but there's also other ways to deploy that. You can do what's called iframe injections on a website. So we saw this a lot last couple of years, especially in the financial industry, where they would be injected on iframes on, say, the Financial Times or Bloomberg or something like that. And as soon as you moved across blank space on a website, say between articles that you were reading, your mouse just changed from a pointer to a finger to a pointer, you just got injected with whatever piece of code they put on. In this instance, could have been a copy of WannaCry, right? That just got launched onto your system just because you moved your mouse between articles on a website. So securing your code goes deep, deep, deep. And this is as far as, DevOps and Agile. You got to scan your code, no matter how irrelevant you think that patch or that plugin or that theme or that code update was. Scan your code. Scan your code after any minor or major change. Create access management policies. You got to do. I'm a zero access type of guy, right? So I give people access to what they need, nothing more, nothing less. I remember developers and guys coming up to me, server guys, hey, I need admin access to this environment. Why? Well, because I got to tune this. Well, you don't need admin access. You just need service access to that environment, and that's it. So you got to create a solid access management policy, but also keep it simple. One of the things you could do is like sync your Active Directory. There was an example of a company in New York City who was a financial firm who, they went ahead and called us up on a Saturday night because their website had gone down, their environment. They weren't processing any transactions, nothing was going on. So we went ahead and took a look at the log data, helped them out, started digging into what was going on, and we found a user ID that logged in about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, and issued a bunch of commands, basically wiping out their website in their cloud-hosted environment, but also affecting their managed-hosted environment. And so when we told them who the user ID was, they were like, oh, crap, that was the IT guy that we fired a couple of days ago, and apparently they didn't remove all his access. They removed his access from brick and mortar, but they didn't do it from the cloud or his managed hosted environment. So if you can sync Active Directory across all three of your environments or all the environments you run on, LDAP, whatever it might be, sync it across all environments. So when you delete an ID there, it deletes all access across the board. Data classification. This is a lot easier said than done. I've had to do data classification projects in the past, and they are bears. And sometimes they take years to actually complete. But if we can just do data classification based on, say, department, right? So we can limit the access that these malicious actors have once they compromise that finance person or that HR person. Say they only have access to just that data of that department and they can't get anywhere else, right? This is where it comes down to locking down, if you're using VLANs or you're doing actual physical segmentation, start locking down access in between departments so that if somebody does get compromised, at least you limit your exposure while you're doing your 24/7 monitoring looking for them. Adopting patch management. I think I don't need to say much on this. With WannaCry, I mean, we've had 2 months, right? And a lot of us in the security industry here at Alert Logic, I mean, we were understanding that on the earlier days, reverse engineering it when it came out of shadow brokers, finding out what was relevant to our customers, what wasn't. So, having that patch management program is critical. If people would have patched 2 months ago when these patches became available, they probably wouldn't have gotten hit like they did today. So patch management is incredibly important. And I got to tell you, test your patches before you roll them out into production. Like we saw with Heartbleed, it took 3 different patches to actually get it right. The first patch came out, solved the original problem, but opened up a new one. The second patch fixed that, but opened up the original one, and then the third one finally got it all right. So you want to test your patches not only to make sure the patches work, but you also want to test the patches on your environment to make sure it doesn't break anything. Reviewing your logs regularly, 24/7. You got to be monitoring and managing those logs. That's how you find that malicious actor who's making that lateral, east-west type of movement across your network. Who's compromised that one user, but is now expanding his reach, by running scans and vulnerability scans and trying to brute force additional passwords, IDs. Build a security toolkit. We showed the tools there. You have to have a full security in-depth strategy for your cloud environment, just like you do your brick and mortar, right? The names may not be the same, but the functions are the same in both environments. And stay informed of the latest vulnerabilities. I'll give you some websites at the end to go ahead and follow, just to stay informed. Stay informed of all the vulnerabilities that are affecting your industry, right? Some of the websites I'll give you, just put in your industry in there, and it will tell you all the data breaches that are happening around the world around that industry, right? And you can learn some lessons. Take those indicators of compromise that those people discovered during their breach, implement them into your environment so that you're not the next victim. Understand your cloud service provider model. Understand that shared security model. Is very, very key. And understand also all those security offerings that your service provider offers you, either directly or through third parties. It's very, very key. And then finally, know your adversaries, right? And on top of all these best practices, you really should be monitoring for threats 24/7, looking for those vulnerabilities, because you got to understand those attackers are sitting on the networks on average of 209 days on a brick and mortar environment. A lot less within the cloud, but within brick and mortar, this is what we're looking at. But you got to monitor for those intrusions, identify, implement policy changes based on things you find. Monitor for 0 days, right, or new and emerging attacks. Like what we see more 0 days like launched against a brick and mortar than we do really against a cloud environment. We look through some of our cloud environments and we find that, the attacks are older sometimes, right? I mean, there's off of our data that we had on 2015 that I showed you earlier. I mean, the oldest attack vector that I saw in there was a 1999 NT4 attack that was actually used. And then all the way up to, brand new 2016, 2017, SQL injection attempts, right? So there's a wide range, but if you understand the technology you have in your environment, you understand the vulnerabilities that affect you, that allows you to fine-tune your security content so that you can go deeper into packet inspection and deeper into each one of these categories versus trying to cover everything in the book. So if you're like a Linux shop, do you really need to be having Windows signatures deployed in your environment? Probably not. It's a waste of resources and it's a waste of, signature content. Turn those off and turn on all the Linux ones that affect you. Turn on all the SQL ones that affect you. PHP, whatever you might be using. Focus your security content around what you use because it's going to allow you to be much more efficient in your delivery process. So understanding your what I call a target asset list, which are all the technologies that you use in your environment. You go through and grab third-party intel, grab the vulnerabilities, and watch list, research related to your technologies, and you extract all the relevant pieces of it, normalize it, and then deploy it to the right technologies. Because sometimes, just because you have an IDS doesn't mean an IDS is the right tool for everything, right? It's great at looking at network controls, network traffic, finding anomalies, finding those call homes, the command and control servers, but maybe deployment of negative rules to a web application firewall is better for your application and has a better chance of detecting exploit than that IDS does. But maybe that IDS has that call home, which is a secondary indicator of compromise that gives validity to the incident that's being created. So basically, focus your research on your target asset lists, normalize, extract, and make sure that you're deploying security content to the right technologies that have the best chance to actually detect somebody trying to exploit a vulnerability in your environment. Now, here's some staying informed of the latest vulnerabilities. Here are the websites I was talking about. Security Focus and SecurityBloggersNetwork.com are phenomenal sites. Like I said, those follow about 3,000 of the top security researchers out there. So go ahead, put your industry out there. Find out what they're talking about. Find out what exploits are happening overseas, because we do see trends of things coming like from Eastern Europe, flow through Western Europe, go down through South America, Central America, and we eventually see it here in the U.S. In fact, we were just, as a research team, talking a few weeks ago because We, in the United States, just started getting hit with something that we saw in Spain about 16 months ago. And so it's if you pay attention and you start learning from those breaches overseas, maybe within your own industries, breaches overseas, grab those indicators of compromise. Use them to defend yourself so you're not the next victim here. Exploit DB, full disclosure, those are places that show all the vulnerabilities that exist on the multiple technology platforms you might use. So like with Exploit DB, you can go there and put, say, you're using Red Hat Linux, and you just put Red Hat Linux, and it will list all the vulnerabilities that exist, the ones that have been reported, and more importantly, the ones that have not yet been reported and don't have CVEs assigned to them, meaning that the company either has just become aware of it and they haven't released a patch, or they're learning as you are learning that it's out there. Most of the time, there's responsible disclosure is what we call it, where if we discover a vulnerability within a platform, we submit it to the manufacturer and we give them 90 days to either patch it or publicly come out and talk about it. And with those 90 days go by and nothing happens, you're going to see that researcher drop that data on Exploit DB or full disclosure, so that you, the public, at least know that vulnerability exists, so that you can monitor for any type of attempted exploitation of that vulnerability. And finally, you got CVE and NIST, which are just great for additional data points and information once a vulnerability has been discussed, classified, and addressed by the manufacturer. Now, on the left, we have blogs, newsletters, cloud security reports, magazines. These are all things you sign up for, across multiple vendors out there, right? I mean, you got to stay informed as much as possible about the cyber breaches that could affect your industry and the vulnerabilities that could affect your technology. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time, and I will hand it back to Desiree.
Thank you very much. So now for the, the part where everyone's looking forward to, the special offer. So Alert Logic, along with Astadia, has come up with a really wonderful offer available to the first 3 participants. And let me just walk you through this offer because it's just really too good to pass up. It is 25 nodes for 3 months. What does that include? It's $17.50 per month. It includes Threat and Log Manager. IDS is 24/7 monitoring and support, internal and external vulnerability scanning. It includes log aggregation, correlation, and daily review by a member of the security team. And this special price is at 50% discount from standard pricing. So this is a really wonderful opportunity that we wanted to offer you guys. And I misspoke. I said the first 3. It's actually, we've extended it to the first 5 webinar participants. So you have to let us know by going to info@astadia.com. Let us know that you're interested. We're holding only 5 spots available. All right, now to the Q&A. We've had some really great questions coming in, so I definitely want to get started. The first question is from a user named Chuck. He said, does Astadia offer incident response as a service? Steve Lack, would you like to take this one on?
Sure. Hi, Chuck. So not typically as a standalone service. If we are responsible for monitoring your environment and you're part of our subscription service, then yes. If not, I'd certainly want to have a conversation about it to see what you have in place and see what we can work out. So certainly we'll have somebody reach out to you and see if we can have a further discussion on it. So I guess the short answer is yes and no, if that's helpful. Certainly, as I said, with the our subscription services in place, that would come as part of it. If not, we would have to discuss and understand what your environment looks like and what tools and technologies are in place to support it. Hope that answers your question.
All right. Next question from Ronald. He says, how does end user verify cloud supplier have a secured hypervisor? Stephen, Coty, would you like to take this one on?
Well, the great thing about the hypervisor exploits is that there's not that many of them that come out per year, which is because they're very impactful. So usually you see maybe 2 to 5 that come out released a year that have a big impact on either VMware or Zen environments. But the service provider is usually up to date. I mean, the last one that came out, I mean, within 24 hours of the public release of it, they had already had everything patched, tested, and running, updated. So I was very, very impressed with the speed in which these service providers actually patch these hypervisor exploits as they come out. Because usually they know about them. They have pretty good research teams. Like I've met with the Amazon research team, a few other service providers, and their research teams are always looking for virtual exploitation, and so they're always out there searching. So I have a lot of great faith in what they can do. But as far as testing, I mean, there are tools out there such as Kali Linux that allow you to test to ensure that there is no exploitation of the hypervisor. But I wouldn't encourage doing it too frequently because they might send you a little notice about it.
All right. Next question. With WannaCry and other ransomware attacks becoming more prevalent, what should a company do about it? Steve Lack, do you want to take this one?
Sure. Well, certainly with WannaCry, and I think we talked about this a little bit early in the presentation to some extent, certainly patch your systems. I think we both mentioned it, and patch them expediently. In other words, you know, again, when we talk about WannaCry, the patch was available in March, and you know, waiting 2 months is too long. The exploit is there, and certainly all versions of Windows are you know, effectively patchable. Second is run detailed vulnerability scans against systems in your environment, certainly. Disable SMB or service message block version 1 if possible, and you know, this is a 30-year-old protocol that's used for networks, and while it's still not, you know, used really for machine to machine per se, there are some printers and things like that that still use this, so you know, be careful with that. Obviously needs-based access to networks, so access controls, really important. And I think the other thing really here is backing up data to offline media, because something like WannaCry is going to really infect even things like USB drives and things like that. So backing up to offline media certainly is a smart thing to do. And then obviously we think you need to keep current with network, web application, and scanning and log alerts, as mentioned by Coty in this presentation. Anything else you want to add to that, Coty?
I just going to reinforce the patching that you mentioned, man, because I mean, seriously, 2 months that patch has been available out there, you know, this shouldn't have had the impact it had, seriously. But I mean, there's a lot of other things that go along with that, as far as just, you know, having good monitoring, right? Monitoring for attempted exploitation is very key too, because there's been instances where, with ransomware and specifically, where, you know, you infect a single workstation, and as that workstation is calling home to download the additional payloads onto that single workstation, if you're monitoring 24/7, you're seeing that communication going outbound and coming back and dropping additional payloads. So which means you have time, you know, like at Alert Logic, we have a 15-minute SLA to let you know, right? So you should be able to take that single workstation online before it starts making those lateral moves. So I think monitoring your environment and having a very efficient incident response plan to be able to mitigate the risk of something like this, like turning off the switch port immediately, being able to remotely do that, or things like that, to be able to just mitigate the risk. You know, better to lose a single workstation than your entire server infrastructure.
Wonderful. Next question is from George. He says, what are the current trends that you see that are making customers consider the cloud? Steve Lack, you want to take this?
Well, sure. I mean, there are a lot of factors here. Certainly, infrastructure getting older, and does it make more sense to replace hardware? There's that CapEx versus OpEx discussion. So rather than spending cash on new servers, sometimes it makes more sense to go to the cloud. Another one that comes up a lot, and certainly a lot recently, is the ability to save on licenses. If you can move from no names mentioned somebody's database and move it to something like Amazon's RDS, you have the ability to save a ton of money, not only for production, but certainly in disaster recovery. DR, anybody that still is using hot spares in another data center somewhere is spending a ton more money than they would need to, by rather than using a cloud-based disaster recovery scenario. And I guess the last one would be, or not the last one, but another one, let's say, to be able to take advantage of the elasticity in a cloud, which is a lot of people talk about, but it's a little harder to do than just throw it up there. But when it works really well. Certainly for things like busy seasons for retail environments, or more easily done, something like customer-facing websites that run promotions and things like that, where you have the ability to scale out as more people hit them. Certainly are some standard and basic reasons to go to the cloud. I hope that answered the question.
Next question from Karen. She wants to know, do you think the cloud is more secure than on-premise environments? Stephen Coty.
That's a great question. I think security within both environments has matured incredibly. I mean, cloud security has matured so much over the last 10 years through innovation that it is on pace, absolutely, with what's happening in your brick and mortar. The innovation is really what we need to look at, right? Who's innovating more? The service provider model, whose whole business is technology, or is it the IT department at a healthcare facility? Who's just worried about maintaining and managing what they have, not really, working on how can they improve the technology that they use. So I think there's just a difference in focus inside those two different environments, which gives the service provider kind of a little leg up, because that's all they do is eat, live, breathe this type of thing, where most IT departments inside of a company do not. There may be some individuals who do. I mean, I'm not classifying all that they don't, but there are individuals who do stay on top of the latest and greatest, but as a whole, I haven't seen that out there. So the cloud is secure. I can tell you that. The cloud is innovative. The cloud is, security is moving at an incredible pace that I don't see happening in most brick and mortar technologies today.
Great answer. Next question. What are the biggest challenges that you see that companies are facing as they're migrating their workloads to the cloud from traditional environments? Steve Lack.
Wow. Okay. Well, I think, there's a number. One is realizing there are more dependencies than they thought. It's not as easy just to pick up an application and move it. So dependencies on other applications, as well as other pieces of infrastructure that perhaps they hadn't realized. Certainly also there's an issue of skills within a company to maintain the environment. I think Coty was just talking about the folks in brick and mortar really focused on keeping the business running, you know, and really focused on doing their current job and haven't been able to get the training they need to understand the full differences of what's going on in the cloud and being able to maintain that every day. I think also we've seen a lot of companies not really truly understanding the cost. I think a lot of folks think that they just move it up there and it's going to be cheaper, and that's not always the case. I think in one of our previous webinars I talked about the boomerang effect, and there's you know, at least a few clients that I know of that made commitments to senior management that they were going to get 50% savings by moving things to the cloud, and they have not come close to that number. Now, certainly a lot of that comes from, you know, treating the cloud as if it was a piece of hardware, you know, and over provisioning infrastructure, and also just from, you know, lift and shifting applications without, you know, looking at other ways to optimize them. So I think that's probably some of the biggest challenges that we've seen. I don't know if you want to add to that too, Coty.
No, I think you covered that pretty well.
Thanks.
All right, and I think we have time for one last question. This question is from Brian. He says, how do you see threats evolving? Steve and Coty, you want to take this one?
Yeah, you know, threats are constantly evolving. I mean, your attackers don't have the constraints, political, finance, that most defensive organizations have. So they have a lot more freedom to build, destroy, do everything they need. But as far as advancements, I mean, it was interesting. I was just asked this question the other day, and you know, like right now, where everybody's talking about WannaCry, right? The one piece of ransomware that hits Windows. Well, has anybody looked at the rest of that data dump and you know, found out what other vulnerabilities exist? I think we're in store for a lot more coming down the pipe. I've read through the data dump and I've analyzed a lot of the data, and there's Mac exploits in there, there's Linux exploits, there's PHP, there's WordPress, there's everything under the sun that they had vulnerabilities for that were part of that dump. And there are people still analyzing that data, trying to make heads or tails of it or recreate the exploits. And so I think we're just starting to see the beginning of kind of the fallout from that, you know, data dump from shadow brokers. And I'd expect to continue to see more of it that originates from that particular dump, because I mean there was a lot.
All right, great answer. So that concludes our questions. I have been receiving a lot of inquiries wondering if I can share today's presentation. This particular webinar will be available on our website on Tuesday for you to download on demand. And if you're looking for something more specific in regards to something that was presented in this webinar, please email info@astadia.com and we'll be happy to share that information with you and answer all your questions. So this concludes today's webinar. We appreciate having both Steve Black and Stephen Coty share their knowledge on cloud security, so thank you both. And most importantly, we appreciate you joining us today to learn more about this topic, and we look forward to having you join us next time. Stephen and Steve, any concluding thoughts?
That's it. I just want to say thanks everybody for joining, and thanks for Steve and Coty for co-hosting with me.
Yeah, thanks, thanks Steve, thanks Desiree for everything, and yeah, I mean, just final words is just patch your systems, and if there's not a patch available, monitor for attempted exploitation until a patch does come out. You know, that's proactive security right there.
Wonderful takeaway. So on that note, we will leave you get on with the rest of your day, and enjoy. We'll talk to you later. Goodbye.